Welcome to the Revenue Blueprint. This is not another sales podcast on tips and tactics. Instead, we focus on unfiltered stories from founders and early stage sales leaders on what it takes to build a successful revenue team. If you get just a little bit of value from this, we ask that you pay it forward by liking, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. All right, let's get into the episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Revenue Blueprint. Today, I'm joined by Seth, as always, and JT Levin. JT is the head of sales at August Health. He was also...
he's asking you to pause.
It's pronounced, you spelled it right. It's pronounced Levine.
Oh, shit. Okay, good. We will cut that.
We had an E. We came through Ellis Island and we lost our E. We kept the pronunciation, but it was too logistically impossible to get the E put back on.
Man.
So we kept the pronunciation, but every single person says that and they're right, most 9 times out of 10.
All right. Well, we'll
keep it in, dude.
I'm gonna keep this in. This is good. Yeah. So we are with JT Levin. Excuse me.
Now we all know how to say his last name. So.
Now we know. Yeah. Right. It's public record now. So no one will ever get it wrong. But JT, he was the first sales hire. He's been the first sales hire at 3 different companies. Previously, he was first sales hire at ChartHop and then became the VP of sales there. They're a Series C HR tech company backed by A16Z. He was early sales hires at Yext, Sailthrough, Enigma. So he has great perspective on what it's like to build early stage sales teams. So JT, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited to hear your stories and talk through some of this stuff. So because you've been at some of these companies that have done really well, which of these sales roles had the biggest impact on your career?
Well, I think I'm lucky that it was sort of a fortuitous sort of sequence of jobs that ultimately got me here. And it's less about one role and more about the way that they build on each other. I feel really lucky to have started at Yext because it was such a grind. It was an inside sale. It was a cold call. It was 3 to 4 hours a day on the phone. What I didn't know at the time and have come to realize later was that the standards that were being set, I mean, that was first job out of school. I was just young and dumb. The standards that were being set were significantly higher than what was acceptable at most other places. And so I feel really lucky that was the initial standard because that has become the standard for me. The other thing about it is that when you spend that much time on the phone, you learn to talk to all kinds of different people and different personalities. And I think it's really important in a sales process. You have to have some amount of kind of deference to the personality of the people and the organization that you're selling to. And when you spend 4 hours a day talking to veterinarians and dentists and TV repairmen and chiropractors, you get to see all kinds of different personalities. And then from there, Sailthrough took me into a real complex sort of enterprise sale. And you got to understand things like power-based selling, individual buyer motivations, complex deal management. You got to understand how to sort of nurture and look after a deal. And all of those skills then kind of brought me into Enigma, where it was really much more of a consultative, kind of custom solution driven sale. It wasn't as much about us having a product that solved one specific issue as it was about us being able to solve a myriad of problems and sitting down with the buyers, figuring out what the most important and pressing were, and then working with them on a custom solution. That then brings me to ChartHop, where I was the first sales hire and built the team from scratch there. And now I'm sort of doing something similar at a company called August Health.
May I go back to the beginning? And there's so much to unpack there, but the cold calling massive volumes of people to just get those reps of dealing with different types of people feels like such a foundational, or I believe it is such a foundational kind of entry point to selling, right? And maybe that's why that was always traditionally the first hire, as is SDRs still, but like it helped you prepare for how to sell by dealing with lots of different personalities at scale every day over a long period of time. Like, how do you see leaders like us filling the gaps for folks who maybe it's more email based or LinkedIn or fewer calls? Like, is there a way to kind of get folks up to speed to get them those type of reps? If it doesn't, like, is there another way, or how do you fill that gap, or is it just lost to the history?
I think a lot of people want to believe that sales is something you're either sort of inherently good at or not. And there, I do see in general a lack of appreciation for practice and just for reps and for screwing it up and for saying things that maybe didn't sound the best the first time, or maybe were just, silly to say because you didn't understand the space or the buyer, their specific problems well enough to kind of get the answer right. You just have to keep doing it. And so if you are email based, you're going to become really good at writing emails or building sequences. And if you are lucky enough to have a cold call job, and I think you mentioned the SDR team, and you're right, but there's something different about actually closing a sale versus closing a meeting, right? Before actually putting people in a position to agree to say, yes, I will pay money for that. And so if given the choice, I would certainly steer people towards a full cycle sale type of cold call job versus an SDR job. Because there are a few more sort of humps that you have to get over to get to a yes at that point. But no, you have to just practice. There's no shortcut for hard work, right? If you want to be a basketball player, you better be in the gym. I think it's a similar thing here. And, there's all podcasts and books and all kinds of stuff will help, but there's nothing that sort of covers for actually doing the job.
Yeah, I guess my affinity with the cold calling is, I think you alluded to a bit, it like helps you find your own voice and what you can say. Because if it comes out of someone else's mouth, it might sound great, but if it comes out of your mouth, it's not authentic. It kind of finds your own authenticity, again, quickly, at speed, at scale, with a lot of reps. I love it. That's a great takeaway. I went down a rabbit hole there I didn't expect, but I love the idea of the practice is just getting the reps to practice.
Yeah, and scripts are an important point of that, but ultimately you will have to figure out, what works for you, and it's not going to be the exact same as someone else, because you're right, authenticity is so important in sales. It's one of the easiest things for buyers to sniff out is a lack of authenticity there, because they spend their whole lives with humans. They may not know a lot about your product, and they may not be able to sniff out, some of the challenges or perhaps some of the BS that some reps will throw at them there. But they know a person who's full of it when they hear one, or who's fake.
Have you seen early reps that haven't had a lot of practice kind of put the facade on of what they believe a salesperson should sound like, and then they do that, and then you look at them like, who is that person? No one is like a cartoon character. Like, it's not the person I hired. What are you doing? It's like a defense mechanism, or you seen that? I love it.
It happens all the time, and I think one of the most common versions of that is they try to replicate the top rep. They see the person who's been there 12 months or 18 months and is really successful in the job, and they just try to do exactly what they're doing. And it doesn't sound right. It doesn't feel right. And it's just not who they are. And the buyers know it, and it doesn't work. And then the worst part of that is then they sit there going, well, why does it work for Jim? He says it sounds great. I say it sounds terrible. And it's just not you. But there's no right way to be good at sales. There's no one way. And so, there are certain skills that you need to master, of course. Maybe we'll talk about some of those. But ultimately, you have to figure out what works for you, stylistically and personality-wise.
You find yourself in a weird position as a leader when you're telling the most important advice to the person is just to be themselves.
Yeah. Well,
and they're like, it's hard. And you're like, just be yourself.
Yeah. The other side of it, as a leader, is to appreciate who they are and not try to turn them all into you. Yeah. Because what works for me, what I am good at is, usually very different than what other folks are good at. And so don't try to just make a bunch of mini yous on the team.
Yeah. That's really great advice. And I think if anyone's curious as to why JT has succeeded in sales roles many times over his career, because he said, if you are lucky enough to have a cold calling job, JT, you leaned into sales probably way more than most people ever will in their lifetime. But I think one thing that's really difficult to do at startups is to continue to grow, particularly as a first sales hire and then into a leadership role. And you were able to do that at ChartHop in particular. So I think there's probably a lot of leaders that have gone through this conundrum themselves. So how were you able to grow not only as like the first sales hire, making calls yourselves and closing deals yourself, but then to growing out a team underneath you and still have that kind of respect and responsibility from the executive team?
If you want to stay in the job, you have no choice. So you have to just sort of keep figuring it out. And I had a lot of support in that from, a wide range of sort of external kind of mentors who were able to help me kind of go through that process, and who had seen a lot of the challenges that I had before.
Maybe pausing on that, right?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, appreciate your humbleness that you're just forced to, so you figured it out. But like, yes, mentors I think are certainly helped me in my career. How did you find those mentors? I know a lot of young people are looking for mentors. Sometimes I get random cold, like, one line, will you be my mentor? It's like, it's going to take a little bit more than that to get some of my time. But like, how did you find those people, and how would you recommend other people find those people? Because clearly that's been influential in all of our lives, and helping us avoid some pitfalls or help us through tough times or figure stuff out.
They sort of fall into three categories, and it's important to have some in a few different ones. I mean, one is people that you have worked directly with or directly for previously. And that's really nice because they're going to know you really well, and they're going to be able to sort of proactively tell you, like, look, you're not that good at this sort of thing. So don't do it. Hire somebody for that.
I was going to say, important to get, obviously, choosing your manager, one of the most important things. Sounds like the long-term value of that, in addition to short-term and all those things, is that they can be your mentor longer, right? So that sounds like,
yeah, people don't quit jobs, they quit managers. And so, yeah, having good managers and in any kind of early stage job, ultimately it has to start with conviction in the founder, conviction in the founding team to be able to take the company, someplace better than where it is. You don't have a lot of data. You don't have a lot of metrics, to tell you like this is a really compelling opportunity. So there's the one bucket of the people you've worked with. There's the second bucket of people that you've sort of encountered and seen out in the field. Maybe that's somebody that worked at a competitor that you saw regularly. It might be other folks, that you have gotten to know over the years in sort of tangential spaces. And then actually I had a guy that was recommended, Peter Worcester was recommended by Andreessen when I proactively went. And I would really encourage people to be proactive about finding, those types of folks, because there's no shame in putting your hand up and going, I might be a little in over my head here.
Did you ask Andreessen directly, like if they had suggestions?
I did. Yeah. I asked them if there was anybody. I was asking a bunch of folks if there was anybody that they worked with, and they introduced me to Peter. And then, you sort of got to interview them, because you need to also make sure that you two are going to sort of vibe a little bit, and that you're going to have a good feeling together, and that you can trust them, because there's going to be some tough conversations, about challenges, and there's going to be maybe some tough conversations about bosses and the state of the business and the state of, maybe product or engineering challenges at an early stage startup. And so you got to find somebody that you have a good rapport with and that you can trust. And then, you put a support system in, and you just try to get better and, read, and there's, networking groups like Pavilion, and that type of stuff to sort of, help and support you. And then you just go and try to do it, and hopefully it works out. And if it doesn't, erase the mistakes as quickly as possible, stick with what works, and kick on from there, because the job is constantly evolving, which is the fun part of it, is that it's always sort of becoming something different if you're doing it right. If you're not doing it right, then it's not becoming something different. But if you're doing it right, sales are being made, the company's growing, then the nature of the job is evolving too.
So there's two other follow-ups on this I have. First, from a tactical standpoint, right? Like when you got the intro to Peter from Andreessen, was like did he know the context that you were looking for a mentor? So, okay, so he went in eyes wide open that you were looking for mentorship.
Yeah, he does this as a living. He's had a really good run, taking a few companies from 0 to 100 million in ARR, and done quite well. And so this is what he does now for a living. So Yeah. And then, you have.
So maybe that's another thing to highlight. So it sounds like this was a paid, I don't even know the details of it, but like founders paying for or investors paying for mentorship for junior leaders probably, again, is a good signal that the founders and or investors understand the complexity of this whole evolution of careers.
Yeah, and worth every penny, I would argue, because if you can get somebody to stay in it, you mentioned sort of respect there, Jason. I think one of the biggest things I had going for me in that role was the amount of respect that had come from proving that I could do this job. I had been, the top rep, I guess. Like, I was successful at this, and then you start to build the team. And so when you give people advice or you sit down and have, conversations, they're not sitting there going, yeah, but why are you telling me how to close this deal? There's no chance you'd be able to close this deal. I think that's a thought that goes through a lot of reps' heads out there when they sit down and do the pipeline review, or they have a QBR and the VP of sales starts saying, well, what about this and what about that? And they're thinking, if you're thinking of this tactic, I can assure you I have already thought.
So I have a curveball question. If you're a rep, so back in the olden days, and now you've been on both sides of it, and the leader is providing advice that is not helpful because they've never actually sold it. As a rep, if you're smart, you're like, this is really helpful. Thank you. Oh, your advice helped me close this deal. But you're really just like, dude, you're going to mess this up. Like, how do you recommend reps? I know it's a tough question, but how would you recommend reps navigating those situations?
Sometimes you just got to sit and take it. And sometimes it's like in the best interest of everybody for you to just sort of sit and take it. I think it really comes down to the personality of, the VP of sales that you ultimately work for, or, that regional VP or whatever that, kind of frontline manager looks like. Can you have that conversation with them and say, hey, I really don't want to inject you into this deal at the 1 yard line. It's tough.
But I guess would that be a signal of a good leader that knows that they don't know and is just like, hey, I don't know, here's some ideas, but you know better than me kind of mentality?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of leaders make. You have a rep who has spent hours and hours and hours on a deal, and now you want to pop up when we're sort of negotiating price, and you want to talk about how to run the deal or like how to get it over the line. You don't understand the dynamics. You don't understand the key drivers for the business. You don't understand buyer personalities. Like, have a conversation, offer advice. Yes, manage your reps, but at the same time, understand that they may have already invested 25 hours, and a 15-minute conversation is not going to get you up to speed in a way that allows you to make, extremely effective advice.
In fact, it can be harmful. I have one of the best reps I've ever worked for. We're very close. He calls me the closer because at the 1 yard line, I came in and opened my mouth for 15 minutes to help close the deal. And we walked out of the meeting. He's like, I think I just lost that deal because of you. Like, thanks, closer. And like, fortunately, he forgave me, and I learned my lesson. I was like, no, I'm not. So he'll even text me once in a while. I was like, what's up, closer? I was just like, oh, dude. But
yeah. I worked for a few VPs that I would, you try to keep away from your deals. And I think a lot of reps will be able to relate to that. So it's incumbent on the managers to recognize those situations and to.
Yeah, that restraint is important. So you said Peter was worth every penny, and I'm sure some of the other mentors were as well, but can you give us some specifics on the types of stuff that he helped you really break through, or maybe just learn a lot faster than you would have otherwise?
Yeah, there were a horde of things that could have easily been screwed up around. It starts with timing, right? When should I do X? When should I hire an SDR? What should that profile look like? When do I need sales operations? When do I need sales enablement? What tools should sort of come in, when? And then you get into some of the sort of tricky managerial things, right? When you start and you've got a team of 4, maybe I've got some territories. I'm probably just in like a round robin free-for-all type of thing. But as a company scales, there are some tough conversations that have to be had with reps, even top performing reps, to say territories getting cut, or you're going to work certain deals that maybe you previously weren't, or you're not going to work some of these small dollar deals that for a lot of reps it's like this was easy money. on the bottom half of sort of the ACV side of things. And so kind of coaching through how to frame some of the scale decisions that have to be made in the best interest of the team and in the best interest of the company, which may not always necessarily be in the best interest of your top, 1 or 2 or 3 reps, and they're going to be annoyed about it. And I was annoyed about it when I was one of those folks, was a really, really big help. The kind of person-to-person sort of conversations and how to think about the best interest of the business as a whole as you scale were some of the key areas, and then timing as well. Were kind of the big two things there.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. Like, I think people care to figure out, okay, I got a mentor, then what do I ask them? What direction do I take? So that's really helpful to hear.
I would encourage people in those conversations to try to come prepared with some things. Otherwise, it just sort of turns into therapy, right? I just sort of sit there and this is what's bothering me. This is what's stressing. It's like, what are the actual things that need to happen next to get this business, to a better place than it is right now? And so try to come, with the real sort of tactical side of things. Occasional therapy.
So I think it's also great advice for any aspiring mentors and sales reps and leaders will be there. Is like, that's what I think about a lot, is like, what do we need to do next? What's the sequencing of events to make this work? And that's where the kind of experience can be really valuable for someone that's just like, maybe that's the question from the mentee. What do I do next? And the mentor is, this is what we do next.
Yeah, but there's a horde of things I can do next, right? There's so many things I could do next. How to sequence them, when to do them. It's really, really important to think about.
Yeah, right. The best mentors and coaches can help you kind of cut through the noise and figure out how to prioritize that stuff. I think that's really helpful. And that's good advice too for any reps too when they're going to their one-on-ones with managers, is to come very prepared, right? So you can extract the most that you can out of that meeting.
Yeah, I don't want those one-on-ones to just turn into like, let's just sort of talk about each one of your your deals in a sort of sloppy fashion, right? Let's try to help be a better rep, and that will make, a larger impact than us just figuring out, strategizing how to close some, mid-value deal in your pipeline.
Yeah. Let me ask you this piece as well with ChartHop. So, right, you came in like the head of sales title, which is commonplace, right, for these sales leader hires that are early stage that might not have a team yet. And you grew into that VP of sales role where you had a full team underneath you. If you look back, how did you think of yourself as a sales leader in the beginning versus at the end? What had changed in you the most? What abilities or skills had changed the most that gave you confidence that like you were a true VP of sales by the end?
It's the focus on systemization and processes. The team got to 43, and it is the fact that you stop approaching each individual problem or challenge as a one-off that needs to be solved. And you start to approach it as, well, what do I need to do? Because I've got 19 AEs. So how do I figure out a way that, this problem doesn't impact all of them, or they can all take advantage of this opportunity to be better? And you have to approach everything with a much sort of horizontal view rather than, I need to make the sale. I need to make more outbound calls. I need to increase my sequences, right? I need to tighten up, a little bit of a focus around ICP. It's like, I need to create ICP material, and I need to work and ensure that I instill that ICP knowledge across the entire, sales team. And so it's really that thinking about process and consistency and scale more so than just like trying to make the turnstile turn over, bring in a few bucks and let's get to tomorrow.
How did you think about that as when you were selling yourself as an IC, about how to be like, is this something that's scalable? Did you not just like, how do I sell this? And then I'll figure out what I'm doing later and trying to compartmentalize that into operational excellence? Or like, how was your thinking on that as you approached, obviously generating revenue, which was the most important thing?
Hiring your first rep will force you to have to think about that. One of the biggest things I would encourage people who are in that first sort of sales role to do, even if you don't think that you're going to be the one who goes on to the VP of sales, is just start writing everything down. Write down what works, write down what's not working. If you have a little process, you get a piece of information about a competitor, like that is the start of the competitive battle card. Write it all down. Otherwise, you end up in the position that I'm in, where you're 6 months into the job. It's going great. Sales are good. It's time to hire somebody. You get them in, and then you go, oh, like, now I got to just brain dump everything. And you're sitting there for 2 days, just banging out every single little thing.
And their eyes are glazed over by like halfway through the first day being like, is this getting through to you? You got to remember all this, dude. Come on.
The preparation for that was horrible. I mean, I remember sitting there for days, just like this massive, nasty outline of things that I would then kind of go back and try to rearrange into what I thought was a coherent way to teach Kyle in that case. And so I would really encourage people to try to think about all of the things that you're, ultimately going to need, like the things that you have established work, things that you're going to need to be able to tell people, like, what's your InfoSec process? What happens when a contract red line comes back? What do we do on all of this? Because you're going to get the question. Rep's going to go make the first sale. They're going to turn up and they're going to ask you. And so maybe that becomes the opportunity where you write it down. But if you've got kind of a knowledge base, mapped out on Notion or whatever else you use, you'll be in a
right. Way better to do it during the onboarding so they don't have to ask you later. So here it is. You know where to find it. We covered that in the onboarding.
And that was a big mistake that you can quickly overcome it. It's just really annoying, and that then the body of work you've put together there is somewhat incomplete. You just go from months going, oh yeah, that thing, because you're just barraged with questions on how something works. It's just tough because when you start it from scratch, everything's in your head, and you feel good. You remember it. Smart enough person. It's all here. I got it. And off we go. But then you have to transfer it to somebody else, and that's where the mess starts.
And when you went through that scaling process, when did you hire? When did you hire a middle manager or an SDR lead? What was the timing of that? I get that question a lot. And then the follow-on is like, what did you learn to do better next time?
I think the biggest mistake people make is they try to set some sort of, like, in 3 months, we want to hire our first SDR. I see a lot of reps that fail in jobs because the company didn't set them up to be successful. That was my biggest thing, was that I wasn't going to let if a rep failed, I wasn't going to come home and sit here and think to myself, did they fail because the company didn't put them in a position to be successful? And I think a lot of, we always look at resumes and we want to go, oh, they stayed there for 13 months and they stayed there for 11 months. And in a lot of cases, yeah, the rep, wasn't the right fit for the job, probably should have been hired, or it didn't work out. But in a lot of cases, the company is to blame, not the rep. And so when you think about, when do I hire an SDR team? Well, do I have some messaging that's going to work? Can I equip them with some messaging? Do I have some collateral? Like, do I have the things that they're going to need to be able to sort of nurse, and bring folks kind of through a pipeline to get to a meeting? Do I have some logos? Do I have some case studies, some testimonials? Like, do I have any reason that somebody in receiving a cold message should want to buy into what we're talking about? And so when you can say confidently yes to those questions, okay, now it's probably time. And I got very, very lucky on this one that I was able to hire a BDR manager to start the team. I had somebody that I had, my wife actually had worked with previously, and the timing lined up perfectly. And so I was able to hire him and to bring on another woman under him. And then the two of them, sort of built it out from there. If anybody is presented with that opportunity, I would strongly recommend that you jump at it, because managing a BDR team is a very labor-intensive process. And if you could find somebody who can do the job and is willing to sort of be the BDR at first, figure it all out, similar to the way I did it on the AE side of things, and then kind of grow and scale the team, you're going to be in a much better position than, if you're trying to manage your first 2 or 3 reps on one side and you're trying to manage 3 or 4 BDRs fresh out of school. The enablement piece of that is a huge body of work. And
I love that we all laughed at that. Probably because we've been the BDRs who were unruly, and then we had to manage the unruly BDRs. I'm like, oh, this is exhausting. They're chasing cats here.
Yeah. And so And then on the AE side, the team just hit a size where there's sort of.
Yeah. How many reps was it when you hired the middle, like a manager, and how'd you?
I think we were 9 at that point. We had a clear plan to get to 15, and it just becomes, painfully obvious that if you're going to do that, somebody's got to manage that.
What went well with that hire, or what didn't go well with that hire? What would you sell to other folks that are thinking about making that hire? Because I just see that as a pitfall of scaling at so many companies. You do all this other stuff, right, which is already really, really hard, and you get there, and then you hire a middle manager that like collapses something. It's like, yeah, what did you learn about all that? What would you impart in our listeners?
I don't think I gave enough direction. We hired somebody who was sort of veteran, and I just thought, like, great, she knows what she's doing here.
I can finally go on vacation.
Yeah, I'm going to go on paternity leave, actually. And in reality, I needed to provide a little bit more direction in terms of what works here, what our processes look like, what are the metrics that we're managing towards. And I really kind of failed at setting her on the right course to, effectively manage the team in terms of.
Okay, so not micromanage, but more management or guidance than you probably would assume.
Yeah, it just in terms of process, and it all comes back to like sort of thinking about things more horizontally. It's like what does she need to be able to get the most out of these 9 reps? And what does our process look like? How do we run deals? Who are the people that we need to talk to? And then, you convey that so that then they have a series of things that in those one-on-ones and in their team meetings and in just sort of examining any type of deal or progress or interviewing to hire folks, that they know that we're looking for kind of a series of values around us.
Yeah. And I think that's also one of the common traps, I think, when you're making a one-off hire, in this case, a manager, or even say like a RevOps person for the first time, is that, right, you just built a team to 9 AEs and probably multiple SDRs at that point. So you had spent the last 6-12 months scaling that interview process, like finding repeatability in that and having a training program that you could just iterate on. Now, all of a sudden, you got to build that all out again from scratch for this one hire. And right, that means like a brand new training process. You can steal some parts, but other parts you can't. And I think, I've definitely failed this before myself, but you try to shortcut it and you realize that you just need to put in the work up front beforehand to actually onboard them for success.
Yeah, I think it's so easy when you're the one who's been in the job from the beginning. It's so easy to make assumptions that they will understand this or that this will be inherently clear. And you always have to err on the side of people not inherently understanding it, lay it out. And if you spend 1 minute and they go, yeah, I totally get that, you didn't need to explain it, then, we're fine. I went to the pharmacy the other day. My daughter has a little ear infection. And the pharmacist says, give her this antibiotic. You give her 6.7 milliliters. And the woman is demonstrating to me, on the thing, like what 6.7 milliliters looks like on the syringe. And I, thanks, I got it. But that I was thinking about that as I walked away going, I can't believe she had to explain that. You have to do something similar in sales. And if the person goes, yeah, that's fine, then great. But better to show them on the syringe than to just assume that they can properly dose their child.
Let's dig into a little bit this stuff tactically here for a second. So when you are hiring those first set of AEs, what do you are you have any like principles that are guiding you? Do you have a process? Walk us through your framework there.
Big time. So trust. Number one thing is trust. That is the whole thing that you got to have, because the rep is going to have a huge opportunity to make a massive mess for the company. They could sell the wrong deals. They can make bad first impressions. You're going to need to trust that they know how to run and manage a deal, because you're probably not going to have an understanding of what an optimal sales process looks like, but you're definitely not going to have the tools in place to properly, monitor a sales process. And so trust is where it starts. And trust is so important in the sale as an early stage rep, because it's rare that the company is ultimately buying where you are. They're really buying more likely where you're going or what is coming next They are also going to need to trust that InfoSec is sort of buttoned up enough, because you probably don't have something like a SOC 2. And they're going to have to trust that you're going to be around, because they are taking a much more personal risk than they would be if they buy an established brand. And I learned that in an extremely painful way when I was working at Sailthrough. So trust is a big one. You have to find somebody that you have kind of complete trust in. Are they going to tell you the truth? Like, are they going to sugarcoat it? Because sugarcoating is really dangerous stuff in an early stage startup. They got to be really optimistic, right? We have to believe that we're going somewhere better. It's not very fun working at an early stage startup that's not making progress. And you need that optimism. And then you need resiliency as well, because there are going to be, and I go through this right now, deals that you lose that in 1 to 2 years you're going to win. You may have InfoSec challenges. You may have feature completeness issues. You may have a buyer that's unwilling to sort of take the personal risk. And worst of all, the deal might just be too big for the company. Like, you may not be ready to truly service that deal. And so you have to understand, like, we will be in a better place, and these checks will be coming. But those are sort of the big three things: is the trust, the optimism, because you get your teeth kicked in so much. And then that resiliency to bounce back are the things that I'm looking for in that first sales hire. What
about intellect? Would you say like elevated intellect in the first hire? Okay.
Absolutely, because we talked a lot about sort of systemization and process, but there is a lot of things that are going to be said for the first time. There are going to be a lot of answers to questions that have never come out of anybody's mouth. There's going to be a lot of questions you've never heard before. There's going to be problems that you didn't even know were real challenges. And so, to the extent that you can find somebody who has that kind of elevated intellect, a little more personality, a little more likability, really, really good on their feet, that's really important, because it's really easy to lose deals. Winning deals is hard. Any schmo can come out and lose a deal, right? And there are so many opportunities to blow the deal. Little questions that may seem, innocuous or unimportant may actually end up being the big thing. And so you need somebody who can handle all of that and not screw up those precious few leads that you are getting.
So anybody listening who hasn't hired this role, it probably sounds like it's unicorn hunting that you're discussing, but I've hired this role a bunch of times at a bunch of startups. So what would you say, what percentage of reps actually fit this profile that you're discussing? Is it top 5%, top 1%? Like, is it 1 out of 100? I mean, again, because it's not a unicorn. They exist. We've done the role. We've hired these people. Like,
it's probably 5%. Yeah, you got to want to do it too. I always think about interviewing. There's sort of two categories. There's all the things I can't control or I can't teach. And then there's all the things I can. So I want to start by going through all the things I can't control. Do you work hard? What's your personality like? Are you likable? Right? Do you ask good questions? Just as a general rule, are you a curious person? Right? If you don't work hard, I'm not going to fix that. I'm not going to be naive enough.
But I like this self-selection. I think that's key. A lot of people don't want to work at a startup, so you're already going to cut out all those people. So if they're already curious and they're interested in this role and willing to take that risk, they have a different risk profile that already kind of sets them up to be more likely to be successful in this role. And then you can kind of screen them for the other stuff.
Yep. And then and as part of that, I think I would really encourage founders, like, be very honest with somebody about what they're walking into. You see a lot of folks that sign up for a role like this or a similar role, and then they walk into it and product market fit isn't what we thought. Oh, those big logos are actually on little pilots. Like, oh, InfoSec is not necessarily buttoned up. We're not sure if that next funding round is going to come in. Like, hiring the wrong person in this role will set you back, a significant amount. So don't sugarcoat it, because they're going to figure it out.
Right. If you're almost talking them out of the job and they still want it, it's like a good sign.
Yeah. And then I would encourage on the rep side of things. Yes. People love to talk about metrics and analytics and all of that thing. End of the day, when you put your head on the pillow and you're considering this role, are you thinking about it? Are you already seeing yourself in this? Are you excited thinking about the prospect of getting after that, knowing how hard it's going to be and what a slog it's going to be. If you're not, do not take the job, because you're just not going to be able.
Hey, whatever you think, it's going to be harder.
Yeah.
So if you're skeptical, it's going to be debilitating.
Yeah. There's so much hard stuff you don't know about yet. Maybe you know the space a little bit, but if you're not having a little bit of that, that kind of that crush sort of feeling, like if you're not having that in your gut, then you're in a bad spot.
We're running into the last 5-10 minutes of our conversation today. So there's a couple things I want to make sure we get to. One is talking about having someone hired above you. But before we get there, just bringing back to this, closing up the hiring stuff, right? We talked about the resiliency, optimism, intellect, and trust as key factors for any first sales hire. How do you test for those in the interview process? What signals are you looking for?
Yeah, so some of it you're going to pick up over the course of the interview, right? Some of the personality type of things, on the trust side, are they reliable? Did they send a thank you note? If you give them little tidbits, I always want to have a demo as part of an interview process. I want to try to put a few breadcrumbs down. Did they bring those back in? As part of that demo, I want to see how they're going to run a demo, how they're going to run discovery, because you also don't have a bunch of time to sales train for those early hires, right? You kind of need somebody who's more or less ready to go. I think work ethic is one of the toughest things. So references are going to be sort of crucial on that. Although if you can't find, one or two people to say nice things about you, yeah, you're really, really bad.
So that's a really good signal.
It's a low bar. Yeah. But and so, hopefully you can fish around on back channels, but sort of just, hopefully you can find some numbers from a previous job, some metrics that they can talk about how they got there. I think you will, when talking about sales process, you'll be able to pick up a little bit on kind of work ethic and how they approach that. So those are some of the things there. And then, trust is another, sort of really big part. I would never hire anybody for an early stage job that I haven't sat across and had a meal with. I think that matters in a remote world.
I heard this the other day. We're going to do this at one of the companies I work with in Germany, is bringing them on a sales call before you hire them. And they said it was really interesting because you're going to have to be in the car, because they sell robotics, AI software. And they're like, we're going to bring them in the car. So we're going to have to get to know them a little bit, see if you like spending time with them, then bring them into the meeting and see, we know they don't know anything. So are they able to add a little value, or keep their mouth shut, or it's a rather risky. It's late, obviously the last stage, but it's an interesting, one, would you hire someone that you wouldn't bring into a sales call? Probably not. So that's a good rubric. And then two, how do they handle themselves? And do you want to go to another call with them? Can they ask a one question that adds a little value, even though they don't know anything? How do they handle it? So there's obviously a huge time investment, but quite an interesting test of what, the sitting across from them.
Yeah, I don't know if I would be brave enough to go that far, but you did just hit on one of, I think, the hardest skills to learn, which is knowing when to shut your mouth. Are they going to try to inject themselves in the conversation? Yeah, knowing when to shut up is one of the toughest things to learn as a sales rep. And, in order to be really good at this, you need to know when to be quiet. And that's more often than not.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Last piece here. So one of the toughest pills for any sales leader to swallow at a startup is when someone gets hired in above them. And JT, I know you had this experience. So can you talk us through what that was like, and what the emotions were going through it, and ultimately what happened?
Yeah, it sucks. It stings. Let's not, salespeople are full of pride too, and it stings. I was very fortunate when I was at an earlier job in my career. I got to watch a senior rep. We were a small team who thought he was going to become the VP of sales, not become the VP of sales. And they hired somebody externally. And in a rash decision, he decided to quit. And he walked away from a really fat pipeline that I was able to inherit. I mean, this was probably, for me personally, a six-figure decision, because I inherited this incredible pipeline. And that always stuck with me. Don't do that. If you're the early stage hire, the beauty of it is that the job only gets easier. There's nothing harder. The sale will never be harder than when you have just raised a Series A. You have like one piece of marketing collateral. You have one customer logo you can use, and you have no case studies. Like,
that is some brilliant wisdom right there, man. I like it.
So don't go do all of the hard work and then quit when it's gotten easier. You've already done the hard bit. So it stunk. Take a couple days to sort of sit there and feel a little bad for yourself, but then realize, one, I've already done the hard work. Two, I had a clear role defined to go on. And in my case, it was just, we want to hire somebody. The team's gotten pretty big. We want to hire somebody with sort of a proven track record and more seniority, especially as you start to go out to think about going out for a big Series C. And three, remember that you're, in most cases, certainly in mine, you're sitting on a huge amount of equity. I think one of the mistakes that salespeople make is that when the going's good, they think it's them. When the going's bad, they think it's the company. When you're in a good...
That isn't true. That isn't true.
When you're in a good sales spot and the going's good, it's pretty rare that you're just going to jump to another really good spot. There are points you see it slow down, the wave kind of crests and it's time to go. But if the going's good and you're making money and you're making sales and the company's headed in the right direction, you're probably in a good spot. And so in that case, the resiliency and the optimism take over, and you say, well, we're going to bring on somebody I can hopefully learn quite a bit from. I've got a clearly defined role. The going's good. I'm sitting on a huge amount of equity because I was the first revenue hire. And after a couple of days, you sort of kick on. And but yeah, it stings. But ultimately, what you realize fairly quickly, if you're willing to set your ego aside, is that what is in the best interest of you is to sit here. And so, yeah, I would encourage everybody to really, be thoughtful about that. Don't do something rash, but also realize that you've already done the hard work. So now go enjoy the simpler life.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is so helpful, I think, for a lot of people to hear. And knowing that you had that experience early on in your career to give that context is pretty invaluable. Last question we like to get people out of here on is, what is one lesson or piece of advice that you think about almost every day? You know what?
It's a piece of advice that I got from a friend's dad, that life is just one giant cold call. And just remember, no matter who, if you're the doctor walking in to meet a new patient, if you're me calling a senior living operator, ultimately life is just one giant series of cold calls. And, be ready to make them, be ready to receive them, and you never know what's going to happen. And so have as many conversations as possible. And then, the other one is just remember that this is a skill set. It does require practice. It does take time. It takes repetition. And, there are a few folks that are sort of naturals at it, but they are a very, very small minority.
I think we should start an academy for children, getting them skilled up on their cold calls early for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. We can start the Cutco knife selling for,
yeah. I love it.
Well, JT, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, guys. It's been fun. So, good luck. Yeah, you can find me. It's JT at augusthealth.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, JT Levin without an E. And
plug August Health real quick. Give us what's the pitch?
Yeah, so we are a modern, purpose-built electronic health record specifically for senior living. So I actually was looking for something that was a bit more kind of real life in my next role as I was getting ready to leave ChartHop, and was lucky enough to find these guys. So we're a small Series A startup, and we make software to manage senior living communities. So assisted living and memory care for folks with Alzheimer's and dementia, to help those operators take care of the needs of the families and the needs of the residents.
Well, that's awesome that you found something that's got some additional mission behind it. And obviously you have just some crazy good experiences in the early startup sales space. So I'm sure they're lucky to have you. But thanks again for your time, and really looking forward to getting this out to the community.